In a land where the river gives life and just as easily takes it away, survival depends on more than courage. It depends on the house beneath your feet. For centuries, Amazonian families lived in malokas raised on wooden stilts, trusting tradition to keep them safe through the yearly floods. But in 1480, when the river rose higher and faster than anyone had seen, one woman refused to trust fate alone. Yara, a master weaver haunted by memories of the Great Flood of 1465, began to study the water itself, its currents, its moods, its relentless hunger. Where others saw a river to be feared, she saw a problem to be solved. Her answer was revolutionary. Deeper, stronger stilts made from chonta palm, roofs woven from dense, water-shedding irope fronds, and, most daring of all, a modular floor that could rise with the flood instead of sinking beneath it. Her design defied centuries of belief, and the elders condemned it as pride, a challenge to the river spirits. But when the Great Flood finally arrived, exploding through the forest as a 10-meter wall of water, the old homes collapsed, and Yara's stood firm. As families clung to her raised platform, her once shunned house became the ark that saved an entire village. How did indigenous Amazon tribes engineer flood-proof homes centuries ahead of their time? And how did one woman's vision rewrite the future of her people? Part 1. The year is 1480. The world is a tapestry of green and brown, woven by the greatest river on earth. In the heart of the Amazon basin, the Arawak village of Amaru Cancha stands as a testament to a life lived in rhythm with the water. The village is a constellation of a dozen circular homes, or malokas, built on stilts, palafitos, that lift them above the damp earth. They are not structures of defiance, but of accommodation, a graceful compromise with a river that gives life and, just as easily, can take it away. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and 1,000 flowering plants. The sound is a constant symphony, the chatter of monkeys, the cry of unseen birds, the ever-present whispering rush of the river. The village itself is a marvel of indigenous engineering, a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge. The malokas, with their conical roofs of expertly woven palm thatch, are connected by a network of raised wooden walkways, allowing the villagers to move freely, even when the forest floor is a muddy swamp. The stilts, made from the hardiest woods the forest has to offer, are driven deep into the earth, a testament to the builder's understanding of the river's power. But this year, the river's power is different. The water is not just high, it is angry, a churning, sediment-heavy torrent that seems to be actively clawing at the foundations of their world. The river's song is a low, guttural growl, a warning that the old accommodations may no longer be enough. The water itself seems thicker, heavier, carrying with it a greater load of silt and debris, a sign of erosion deep within the forest, a sign that the delicate balance of their world was beginning to unravel. Inside one of these malokas, the air is cooler, the light filtered through the intricate weave of the palm thatch roof. Yara, a woman of 28, sits before a large, upright loom. Her fingers, stained with vegetable dyes, move with a speed and precision that is mesmerizing. She is not just weaving cotton, she is weaving stories, patterns that speak of the river, the forest, and the spirits that inhabit them. Her face, framed by a cascade of straight black hair, is a study in concentration, her dark eyes missing nothing. She is a master weaver, a keeper of the most ancient and sacred of her people's arts. But her mind is not on the patterns taking shape on her loom. It is on the river. Her son, Inti, A boy of 8, with his mother's curious eyes, plays at her feet, carving a small wooden capybara. Her husband, Cale, a man of 32 with the lean, powerful build of a hunter, sits nearby, sharpening the tip of a fishing spear. He is a man of quiet strength, his love for Yara a steady, grounding presence in her often turbulent inner world. He watches her, a flicker of concern in his eyes. He knows where her thoughts go when the river is high. Outside, the river is rising. It is the heart of the rainy season, a time of abundance and danger. The water, a muddy, swirling torrent, has already swallowed the lower banks and is now licking at the base of the stilts that support their homes. It is a familiar yearly drama, a dance between the village and the river that has been performed for centuries. But this year, the river's song has a different, more menacing tone. The water is higher than the elders can remember for this time of year, its current faster, more aggressive. Suddenly, a cry of alarm from the edge of the village. A section of the riverbank, saturated and unstable, has given way, taking with it a small storage hut. The villagers rush to the edge of their elevated walkways, their faces etched with concern. The hut, filled with precious dried fish and cassava, is swept away in an instant, a small sacrifice to the river's insatiable appetite. The incident is a stark reminder of their vulnerability. For Yara, it is more than a reminder. It is a visceral reliving of a nightmare. The sight of the hut being consumed by the brown water triggers a memory, a ghost that has haunted her for 15 years. The Great Flood of 1465. She was 13, and the river, in a fit of unimaginable fury, had risen not just for days, but for weeks. It had not just flooded, it had erased. She remembers the sound, a deafening roar that drowned out all other noise. She remembers the sight of her own family's maloka, its stilts snapped like twigs, being torn from the earth. She remembers her parents, their faces a mask of terror, being swept away in the churning chaos. She had survived by clinging to the branches of a giant kapok tree, a lone, terrified child in a world that had been turned into a raging, liquid hell. Kyle sees the change in her, the sudden tension in her shoulders, the distant, haunted look in her eyes. He comes to her side, his hand a warm, steadying presence on her back. "Yara," he says, his voice a low murmur, "it is not the same. We are safe." But she is not convinced. That evening, as the rain drums a relentless rhythm on the thatch roof, she cannot sleep. She listens to the river, to the groaning of the wooden stilts beneath them, and she knows, with a certainty that chills her to the bone, that safety is an illusion. The next morning she begins her work. She is no longer just a weaver of cloth. She is a student of survival. She spends her days on the walkways, observing the river with an almost obsessive focus. She studies the currents, the eddies, the way the water interacts with the different types of wood. She takes measurements, using knotted vines to track the water's rise. She notes how the stilts of the older houses, made of softer woods, are beginning to show signs of strain, the waterlogged fibers weakening, the bases shifting in the unstable sediment. Her obsession does not go unnoticed. The other villagers watch her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "She grieves for her parents," they whisper. "The river took them, and now it has taken her mind." But Cale understands. He sees the intelligence in her obsession, the desperate, brilliant logic of her fear. After weeks of observation, she begins to form an idea, a radical, almost heretical concept. The problem was not the river. The problem was their houses. They were built to accommodate the river's predictable moods, but not its rages. They were static, rigid structures in a world that was fluid and ever-changing. They needed a new kind of house, a house that could breathe with the river, a house that could rise with the flood. In the fourth month of the rainy season, in the year 1480, with the river still dangerously high, Yara requests a meeting with the village council. She stands before the elders, a small, determined figure in the grand, circular space of the ceremonial Maloka. The air is thick with the smoke of sacred tobacco. Elder Anapu, a man of 65, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes holding the wisdom and the weariness of a lifetime of leadership, listens to her, his expression unreadable. Yara speaks with a quiet, passionate intensity. She does not speak of fear, but of observation. She speaks of the different strengths of wood, of the weakness of stilts driven into soft earth, of the need for a house that can adapt. She proposes a new design, a house built on a foundation of much thicker, more deeply set stilts, made from the incredibly dense and water-resistant chonta palm. A house with a roof woven from the leaves of the Iroquois palm, a weave so tight it could repel the most torrential downpour. And most radically, a house with a floor that was not fixed, but modular, a platform that could be raised on a secondary set of internal posts as the water rose. When she finishes, there is a long, heavy silence. The elders exchange uneasy glances. It is Anapu who finally speaks, his voice a low, powerful rumble. "You speak with the cleverness of a weaver, Yara," he says, his tone laced with a patronizing condescension. "But you do not speak with the wisdom of the ancestors. Our houses have stood for generations. They are a gift from the river spirits. The floods are not a problem to be solved with wood and vine. They are a test of our faith, a cleansing of our village. To build such a house as you describe is an act of pride, an act of defiance. It is to say that we are smarter than the river, smarter than the spirits. It is a dangerous path you walk." He looks around at the other elders, his authority absolute. "The council has heard you," he says, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And the council says no. We will put our faith in the old ways. We will put our faith in the spirits." Yara stands before them, her proposal rejected, her vision dismissed. She looks at the faces of the elders, at the fear and superstition that clouds their judgment. She looks at Anapu, a man she has respected her entire life, and sees not a leader, but a prisoner of the past. She leaves the Maloka, her heart heavy with a new, more terrible fear. It is not the river she is fighting. It is her own people. Part 2. Anapu's dismissal was a public rebuke, a wall of tradition built to contain Yara's radical idea. The village, which had once been a source of communal strength, now felt like a cage. The whispers that had been born of pity now curdled into suspicion. "She courts disaster," they murmured, their fear stoked by the elder's pronouncement. "She will bring the river's wrath upon us all." Yara and her family were ostracized, their small Maloka an island of defiance in a sea of fearful conformity. But the council's rejection, intended to crush her spirit, instead tempered it into a blade of pure, unyielding resolve. The memory of her parents' faces, their hands slipping from her grasp in the churning water, was a fire that no tradition could extinguish. The village's social fabric, once a source of comfort and security, now felt like a suffocating net. The other women would turn away when Yara approached. The men would fall silent. Even the children, sensing the shift in the adult world, would stop their games and stare. It was a heavy, silent punishment, a slow social death by 1,000 cuts. But Yara, fueled by a grief that had been simmering for 15 years, refused to be broken. She found solace in her work, in the clean, honest language of wood and fiber, a language that did not lie, a language that did not fear the future. Her loom became her sanctuary, the rhythmic clatter of the shuttle a counterpoint to the anxious whispers of the village. She wove with a furious, desperate energy, her patterns becoming bolder, more complex, as if she could weave a new reality into existence, a reality where her family was safe, a reality where her vision was not a curse, but a blessing. "They are afraid," Kyle said one evening, his voice a low comfort in the growing darkness. "Anapu is a good man, but his heart is anchored in the past. He cannot see the future you see." "The future is coming, whether he sees it or not," Yara replied, her voice tight with a desperate urgency. "And it will not be stopped by prayers or rituals." She made a decision. If the village would not build her house, she would build it herself. She chose a spot at the far edge of the village, a place slightly higher than the rest, where an ancient ironwood tree stood, its massive roots a testament to its resilience. It would be her partner in this endeavor, its strength a silent rebuke to the village's fear. Kyle, his loyalty to Yara overriding his fear of the social consequences, agreed to help. "Your fight is my fight," he said, his hand covering hers. "Your house is our home." And so, in the first month of the dry season of 1480, the work began. It was an act of breathtaking audacity, a two-person rebellion against 1,000 years of tradition. The first task was the foundation. Yara, guided by her observations, knew that the traditional stilts were the weak point. They were not driven deep enough, and they were made of woods that, while strong, were not impervious to the rot that came with constant immersion. She directed Kyle to harvest chonta palms, a species of hardwood so dense it was said to blunt the sharpest of axes. It was a brutal, exhausting task. Felling the massive palms, hauling them to the building site, and then, most difficult of all, driving them into the earth. They did not just drive them into the soft topsoil. They dug, using sharpened sticks and their bare hands, until they hit the harder clay layer several feet below. They set the massive posts, twice as deep as any other house in the village, a foundation built not for one season, but for a generation. Next came the roof, Yara's domain. She had seen how the traditional roofs, woven from a variety of palm leaves, would begin to leak after a few years, the fibers breaking down under the relentless assault of sun and rain. She chose a single, specific palm, the Iroquois. It was a smaller understory palm, its fronds possessing a unique combination of flexibility and a waxy, water-resistant coating. Harvesting it was difficult. It grew in the dense, snake-infested parts of the forest, far from the river. But Yara was relentless. She and Kale spent weeks gathering the fronds, bundling them, and bringing them back to the village. The weaving itself was a work of art, a complex, interlocking pattern that she had perfected on her loom, now applied on an architectural scale. She wove the fronds into large, dense panels, each one a masterpiece of natural engineering. When they were laid on the roof frame, they overlapped with such precision that they created a seamless, waterproof skin. But it was the floor that was Yara's most radical innovation, the element that drew the most scorn from the other villagers. Tariq, the village's lead builder, a man whose hands had built half the houses in Amaru Concha, would often stop by, his face a mask of bemused contempt. "A house with 2 floors?" he scoffed one afternoon, gesturing at the complex internal structure. "Are you building a house for a woman or for a flock of birds?" Yara's design was, in fact, a house within a house. The main platform, the floor they would live on, was not nailed or tied to the main stilts. Instead, it rested on a secondary set of shorter internal posts. The floor itself was built in sections, like a giant puzzle. Each section could be lifted and the internal posts could be extended, raising the entire living platform. It was a concept born of pure, practical genius, a house that could literally climb above the flood. It was a house designed to be unbuilt and rebuilt, a house as fluid as the river itself. As the dry season wore on, the house took shape. It was a strange, alien structure, taller and more robust than any other Maloka. Its roof, a steep, conical masterpiece of Arapae thatch, shone with a silvery green luster in the sun. The villagers, their initial scorn giving way to a grudging curiosity, would watch from a distance. They saw the intelligence in the design, the undeniable logic of the deep-set stilts and the waterproof roof. But the movable floor, the sheer arrogant audacity of it, was a step too far. It was a violation of the natural order, a piece of cleverness that felt like a dangerous temptation. In the 7th month of the dry season, as the house was nearing completion, a series of strange events unsettled the village. A school of river dolphins, usually a sign of good fortune, beached themselves on a sandbar and died. A flock of macaws, their calls usually a raucous, joyful sound, flew over the village in dead silence. Anapu, his face grim, seized on these events as proof of the spirit's displeasure. He gathered the villagers in the ceremonial Maloka. "The river is speaking to us," he declared, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. "It is warning us. The spirits are angered by this monument to pride." He announced a series of rituals, a week of fasting and prayer to appease the spirits. He pointedly excluded Yara and her family. The message was clear. They were the source of the curse. They were the disease that afflicted the village. The shunning was complete. No one would speak to them. No one would trade with them. They were utterly alone, their strange, beautiful house, a symbol of their isolation. Kyle, his usual optimism worn thin, began to doubt. "Perhaps Anapu is right," he said one night, his voice barely a whisper. "Perhaps we have gone too far." Yara looked at him, her eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering light. "No," she said, her voice as strong and unyielding as the Chanta heartwood. "The river is not angry, it is hungry, and if we do not finish, it will eat us all." She picked up her weaving shuttle, her fingers returning to the familiar, comforting rhythm of her craft. She was not just weaving a blanket, she was weaving a future she would not let fear unravel. Part 3. The first rains of the new season arrived in the 10th month of 1480, earlier than usual. They were not the gentle, life-giving showers of a normal year, but a series of violent, angry squalls that turned the river into a churning, muddy soup. The water level began to rise with an alarming speed, a brown tide that crept relentlessly up the riverbanks. The village watched, a collective anxiety settling over them like the damp, heavy air. Anapu led daily rituals, his chants growing more desperate as the water continued to climb. He sacrificed a prized peccary, its blood a dark stain on the muddy water, a desperate, futile offering to a god that was not listening. The smoke from his sacred fires, meant to appease the sky spirits, was beaten back down by the relentless rain, a thick, choking fog that mirrored the village's growing sense of suffocating dread. The river was no longer their provider, it was their jailer, and the walls of their prison were rising with every passing hour. The familiar, comforting scent of the river, the scent of life and abundance, was replaced by the stench of decay, of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. The symphony of the forest was replaced by the monotonous, oppressive drumming of the rain, a sound that promised not life, but a slow, watery death. In Yara's house, the mood was one of tense anticipation. The river, which had been a distant murmur from their old home, was now a constant thunderous presence, the sound vibrating up through the massive stilts. The water was already swirling around the base of their house, but their floor, set a full 2 meters higher than any other in the village, remained dry. Inti, who in their old house would have been confined to a hammock, could play freely on the dry, spacious floor. He was fascinated by the water, pointing out the strange new fish that swam in the temporary lake that had formed beneath them. The other villagers were not so fortunate. The lower-lying houses were already taking on water, their floors a slick, muddy mess. Families were forced to live in the upper rafters of their homes, their possessions either ruined or piled into precarious, unstable mounds. The air was thick with the stench of damp and decay. The children, confined to small, smoky spaces, grew sick and restless. They would look across the water at Yara's house, a fortress of dryness and space, and the seeds of resentment began to be replaced by a desperate dawning envy. Tariq, the master builder, was one of the most vocal critics of Yara's design. His own house, built according to the time-honored traditions, was now a damp, miserable prison. He had mocked Yara's woman's work, but his own craftsmanship was failing him. He watched her house, its high and dry floor a constant silent rebuke to his pride. He saw the strength of the Chonta stilts, the way the water flowed around them without causing them to shift or tremble. He saw the perfection of the Iroquois roof, which shed the torrential rain without a single leak. He was a man of wood and stone, a man who understood the language of structure, and he could not deny the evidence of his own eyes. The weaver's house was better. In the second month of 1481, the river, which had seemed to stabilize, surged again. A massive pulse of water, born of a storm deep in the Andes, came roaring down the river. The water level rose a full meter in a single night. The village awoke to a scene of chaos. The lower houses were now completely inundated, the water lapping at the edges of their roofs. The current, now a powerful destructive force, began to tear at the foundations of the village. The first house to go was one of the oldest, its stilts, weakened by years of rot, snapping with a sound like a thunderclap. The house and the family inside were swept away in the darkness. The tragedy sent a shockwave of terror through the village. Anapu's rituals had failed. The spirits were not listening. Their faith, the bedrock of their existence, was cracking. Tariq, his own house now dangerously unstable, its floor completely submerged, made a decision. He swallowed his pride, a bitter, unfamiliar taste. He got into his canoe and paddled across the churning water to Yara's house. He did not speak. He did not have to. The desperation on his face was a language Yara understood. She nodded, and he tied his canoe to one of her massive stilts. He climbed the notched log that served as a ladder and stepped onto her dry, spacious floor. He looked around, his builder's eye taking in every detail, the strength of the joinery, the perfection of the weave, the simple, brilliant logic of the raised platform. He looked at Yara, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. "Show me," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was a turning point. With Tariq, the most respected builder in the village, now on her side, the tide of public opinion began to turn. He became her most fervent student, his deep knowledge of traditional techniques now married to her innovative design. Together, with Kyle, they began to refine the system for raising the floor. They developed a simple but effective lever system using long, strong poles to lift the floor sections, which could then be secured to the higher notches on the internal posts. They practiced the process until it was a smooth, efficient dance, a three-person team working in perfect synchrony. They did not have to wait long to test their system in a real crisis. A week later, another surge, even more powerful than the last, came down the river. The water rose with a terrifying speed, and soon it was lapping at the edges of Yara's floor. As the rest of the village watched in horrified fascination, Yara, Kael, and Tariq went to work. In a matter of hours, they had raised their entire living platform by another meter. They were safe. They were dry. They were in control. The demonstration was a revelation. It was a direct, tangible refutation of Anapu's fatalism. It showed that they were not helpless victims of the river's whims, but intelligent, adaptable beings who could use their knowledge and skill to shape their own destiny. That evening, as the rain continued to fall, 2 more families, their own homes on the verge of collapse, paddled to Yara's house and asked for sanctuary. She welcomed them without hesitation. Her house, once a symbol of her isolation, was becoming a beacon of hope. But as she looked out at the dark, swirling water, at the angry, turbulent heart of the river, she knew that the real test was still to come. This was not the great flood. Not yet. Not yet. It was just a warning. Part 4. The warning was not heeded. Anapu, his authority now openly challenged, retreated into a stubborn, self-righteous silence. He saw the growing number of families seeking refuge in Yara's house not as a sign of her wisdom, but as a mass betrayal, a turning away from the spirits. He intensified his rituals, his chants now laced with a new, dark undertone of damnation. He was a man adrift, his spiritual compass spinning wildly in a world he no longer understood. He was no longer a leader. He was a relic, a living ghost in a village that was rapidly leaving him behind. His isolation was a mirror of Yara's own, but where hers was born of innovation, his was born of a desperate, clinging attachment to a past that was being washed away before his very eyes. He had become a prisoner of his own certainty, a man so convinced of his own righteousness that he could no longer see the truth, even as it was lapping at his feet. He saw Yara's house not as a solution, but as the source of the problem, a physical manifestation of the hubris that had angered the spirits. He was a man drowning not in water, but in his own dogma. The 3rd month of 1481 began with an eerie, unnatural calm. The rain stopped. The river, for the first time in months, seemed to hold its breath. The sky, usually a canvas of shifting clouds, was a flat, featureless gray. The air was heavy, humid, and still. The birds were silent. The monkeys were gone. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. Yara felt it. It was a feeling in her bones, a primal ancestral fear that went beyond her own traumatic memories. This was not the calm before the peace. It was the calm before the storm. "It's coming," she said to Kael, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "The great flood, the one the elders speak of in the stories, the one that comes once in a lifetime." And then it began. It started not with a roar, but with a tremor, a low, deep vibration that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. The water in the river, which had been almost still, began to move in a strange, unnatural way, not flowing, but heaving, as if the riverbed itself was rising and falling. And then the sound began, a low, distant rumble that grew steadily in volume until it was a deafening, all-consuming roar. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000 tons of water, a liquid avalanche, a moving mountain of destruction coming straight for them. The great flood of 1481 arrived as a wall of water, a 10-meter-high tsunami that erased the line between the river and the forest. It did not just rise, it attacked. The traditional Malokas, their stilts already weakened, stood no chance. They were not just flooded, they were obliterated, torn from their foundations and smashed into a million pieces of splintered wood. The air was filled with the sound of snapping timber and the terrified screams of the villagers. Yara's house, the house built of defiance and innovation, was hit by the full force of the wave. The impact was staggering, a physical blow that shook the massive structure to its core. The Chonta stilts, driven deep into the clay, held firm, but the sound of the water, a monstrous liquid fist pounding against the floorboards, was terrifying. The house was now an island in a raging, chaotic sea, surrounded by the debris of the destroyed village and the desperate, bobbing heads of the survivors. In the midst of the chaos, a new, more terrible sight. The ceremonial Maloka, the largest and most sacred structure in the village, the very heart of their community, was lifted from its foundations. It tilted, hung for a moment as if in disbelief, and then was swept away, a giant, dying beast consumed by the flood. Anapu, who had been inside, leading a final, desperate ritual, was thrown into the raging water. He was a small, insignificant figure in the vast, churning chaos, his life about to be extinguished. Kyle saw him. Without a word, he and Tariq, their faces set in a grim, determined mask, untied their canoe. It was an act of near-suicidal bravery. The canoe, a small, fragile thing, was almost swamped a dozen times as they fought the monstrous current. They paddled with a desperate, superhuman strength, their muscles screaming in protest, their eyes fixed on the bobbing head of the elder. They reached him just as he was about to go under, his strength gone, his face a mask of shocked, uncomprehending terror. They hauled him into the canoe, a broken, defeated man, and began the long, brutal fight back to the sanctuary of Yara's house. Meanwhile, Yara was directing a rescue of her own. She threw knotted vines from the edge of her platform, pulling in the desperate, half-drowned survivors. Her house, once a home for 3, was now a floating ark, crowded with the terrified, shivering remnants of her community. She moved among them, her voice calm and reassuring, her presence a beacon of strength in the heart of the storm. She was no longer the outcast, the heretic. She was their savior. As the floodwaters raged around them, Anapu, wrapped in a dry blanket, sat in a corner of the crowded room. He watched Yara as she tended to the injured, as she comforted the crying children, as she organized the meager supplies. He looked at the house she had built, the house he had condemned, and he saw not a monument to pride, but a testament to a different kind of faith. A faith in observation, in intelligence, in the enduring, indomitable power of the human spirit. He saw the wisdom in her design, a wisdom that was not in opposition to the spirits, but was a deeper, more profound understanding of their power. He saw that true respect for the river was not blind obedience, but a clear-eyed, intelligent adaptation to its nature. He looked at Yara, and in her eyes he saw not the defiance of a rebel, but the fierce, protective love of a mother. He had been blind, and now, in the heart of the apocalypse, he could see. The storm raged for 3 days, 3 days of terror, of uncertainty, of a world turned upside down. But the house held, the Chonta stilts, the Iroquois roof, the modular floor, they all held. Yara's vision, born of trauma and forged in defiance, had been vindicated in the most brutal, terrifying way imaginable. They had survived. Part 5. On the 4th day, the water began to recede. It retreated as slowly and as grudgingly as it had come, leaving behind a world transformed. The forest floor was a thick, stinking layer of mud, littered with the debris of the destroyed village. The old Amaru Concha was gone, erased from the earth. But the people of Amaru Concha had survived. They had been battered, terrified, and stripped of everything they owned, but they were alive. They owed their lives to one woman and to the house she had built. The air, which had been filled with the roar of the flood, was now filled with a strange, unnatural silence, broken only by the cries of the grieving and the squelch of feet in the mud. The sun, when it finally broke through the clouds, seemed like a cruel joke, illuminating a scene of utter devastation. But amidst the wreckage, there was a flicker of something new, hope. It was a fragile, tentative thing, but it was real, and it was born of a shared experience of survival, a shared understanding that they had faced the worst the world could throw at them, and they had endured. They were no longer just a village, they were a crew, the survivors of a shipwreck, and their captain was the woman they had once scorned. As the survivors stepped out of Yara's house onto the soft, muddy ground, a new sense of unity, born of shared trauma and shared survival, bound them together. The old divisions, the old resentments were washed away with the flood. They were no longer a collection of families. They were a single, cohesive tribe, forged in the crucible of the Great Flood, and their leader, by unspoken, unanimous consent, was Yara. Anapu, his authority shattered, his spirit broken, came to her. He did not speak of spirits or rituals. He spoke of his own blindness, his own pride. "You saw the river," he said, his voice a hoarse, humbled whisper. "I only saw the past. You have saved us. Now you must lead us." And so, under Yara's direction, they began to rebuild. But they did not rebuild the old village. They built a new one, a village designed not just to survive, but to thrive in a world of ever-present change. Every house was built on Yara's design, a fleet of flood-proof arks permanently moored to the earth. Tariq, his pride replaced by a passionate, almost religious devotion to his new craft, became Yara's foreman, his deep knowledge of traditional building techniques now guided by her innovative vision. They taught the other villagers, men and women alike, the art of building the new malokas. The construction was a communal effort, a celebration of their survival, and a testament to their newfound resilience. In the year 1481, a year after the Great Flood, a visitor arrived in the new village of Amaru Cancha. He was a man from the highlands, a stonemason from the great Inca Empire, a man named Pachacuti. He had heard tales of a village that had survived the Great Flood, a village of strange, tall houses that had ridden out the storm. He came to see for himself. He was a man who understood the language of structure, the mathematics of survival, and in Yara's houses he saw a level of engineering genius that rivaled the great stone structures of his own people. He spent a month in the village, studying Yara's designs, making detailed drawings on stretched animal skins. He spoke with Yara at length, a meeting of two great minds, two master builders from different worlds, united by a shared understanding of the delicate, dangerous dance between humanity and the natural world. When he left, he took with him not just the plans for a new kind of house, but a new respect for the wisdom of the river people. 20 years later, in the year 1500, the new Amaru Cancha is a thriving, prosperous community. The houses, their Iroquois roofs, a silvery green against the darker green of the forest, stand tall and proud, a symbol of indigenous ingenuity. The river, which had once been a source of terror, is now a respected, predictable neighbor. The children, who have grown up in the new houses, play without fear, their laughter echoing through the village. Yara, now a respected elder of 48, her hair streaked with silver, sits on the high platform of her house, watching her son, Inti, now a strong young man of 28, teaching a new generation of children how to weave the intricate waterproof patterns of the Iroquois thatch. She looks out at the river, at the calm, life-giving water, and she smiles. The ghosts of her past have been laid to rest. She has not conquered the river. She has learned to dance with it. The final shot is of the village, a fleet of beautiful, resilient arcs, a testament to the enduring power of innovation and a timeless lesson in the art of survival.